A woman plans to marry a millionaire purely out of greed. After getting engaged, she decides to try poisoning him, but things don't go as planned. Mark had always been a shy man, more comfortable with numbers and strategies than with social interactions. From a young age, he stood out for his intelligence but always avoided deeper emotional or social situations. His dedication to work led him to create an online sales platform that became a great success, allowing him to found his own company in the sector. Despite the growth of his fortune and professional recognition, Mark never had much experience in romantic relationships, and as a result, his personal life was almost non-existent. This started to change when, during a business event, he met Carol, a confident, charming and attentive woman who seemed genuinely interested in him. Although hesitant at first, Mark allowed Carol to get closer and the relationship gradually developed. During this time, Mark faced the loss of his parents, a painful blow that left him without any close relatives. Carol became a great support for him, and Mark began to consider her his only family. After a few years together, feeling more and more enchanted and secure with her, Mark decided to propose to her, certain that he had found someone who filled the emptiness in his life. It was almost 6 in the evening when Mark parked the car in the garage and entered the house, carrying a slight expression of fatigue on his face. Days at the company were always intense, but he liked to keep everything under control. Upon opening the front door, he was greeted by the sound of footsteps coming from the living room. Carol, with a smile on her lips, appeared at the entrance. "Hi, my love," she said, walking toward him to give him a kiss on the cheek. "Hi, Carol," Mark replied, returning the gesture. "How was your day?" Carol shrugged with a light smile. "It was fine. I did some shopping this morning and spent the afternoon organizing a few things around here. How about yours?" "It was full, as always," Mark replied, letting out a sigh as he hung his jacket on the hook next to the door. "But nothing I can't handle. I'll go upstairs for a quick shower. I'll be down for dinner." "Okay," Carol said as she returned to the kitchen. "It's almost ready." After a quick and refreshing shower, Mark came downstairs and sat at the dinner table, where Carol had already served 2 well-prepared plates. He smiled as he saw the table arranged with care. "It looks great," he commented as he picked up the cutlery. "I hope it's good," Carol said, pulling out a chair to sit at the table. They began eating and chatting about the events of the day. Mark spoke about the meetings and challenges at the company, while Carol listened attentively, making occasional comments. "Mark," she said, changing the tone as she cut a piece of steak, "what do you think about going out for dinner tomorrow night? It's been a while since we went somewhere different," she said, placing her fork on the table and looking at Mark with a slight smile. But there was a clear expectation in her eyes. Mark raised his eyes from his plate, hesitating. "Dinner tomorrow night? Carol, I don't know. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day, and you know how I get after a full day of meetings. It's not the best day for that." Carol frowned slightly but kept her calm tone. "I understand that you work a lot, Mark, but it's always like this. We never go out, and I think it would be good for both of us to do something different. How about it?" He sighed, looking for a convincing excuse. "I know, but tomorrow night is complicated. They might call from the company, you know how it is. A problem might pop up at the last minute, and if we're out, it will be hard to solve." "Mark," Carol responded, crossing her arms and leaning slightly forward. "You always say that. Every time I talk about going out, you act like the world will fall apart if you're not on the phone. But there's a whole team there. You don't have to answer the phone for one night, especially if it's something really important to us." "I know I have the team, but it's different," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I like to be available for any emergency. That's how I keep things running smoothly." "I can't believe you're telling me your company can't survive without you for a few hours," Carol exclaimed, letting out a light, incredulous laugh. "Mark, it's just dinner. We get dressed up, go out for a nice meal and come back. There's nothing to it." He scratched his head, looking for another way out. What if I'm exhausted? Tomorrow I'll spend the whole day solving problems, and all I'll want when I get home is to rest, not go to a restaurant full of people. Carol took a deep breath, trying to hold back her frustration. How long has it been since we went out? It's been months, Mark. Months. I'm not asking us to go to a party or travel. I just want to go out for dinner, a special moment for us. Is that too much to ask? Mark realized the seriousness in her tone, but still tried to resist. We can order something special here at home. We could have a nice restaurant delivery, dine by candlelight, and that way I won't be worried about work or exhaustion. Carol looked at him with a disappointed expression. Are you serious? It's not about the food, Mark. It's about going out, doing something different, feeling like you actually care about spending time with me, away from all of this. I'm here alone all day, and you're always focused on the company. Sometimes it feels like I'm just a detail in your routine. These words hit Mark uncomfortably. He sat in silence for a few moments, feeling the weight of the situation. Finally, he sighed, defeated. Okay, you're right. It's been a while since we went out. Tomorrow night we can go, but it has to be something low-key. Carol's face lit up, the disappointment giving way to a radiant smile. I knew you'd change your mind. Thank you, Mark. It's going to be great, I promise. How about that restaurant downtown, the one with the beautiful view of the city? Sounds good, Mark said, a little resigned but wanting to make up for the argument. You handle the reservation then. Leave it to me, Carol replied excitedly as she returned to eating with enthusiasm. They spent the rest of the dinner talking about the restaurant, the time, and what they could order. Carol was visibly excited, while Mark tried to convince himself that going out would be a good idea. After finishing, they went upstairs to bed, each with different expectations for the next day. The following day, Mark's office continued its busy routine. Documents piled up on his desk, and meetings seemed endless. However, near the end of the day, Mark called his assistant, Kevin, for a chat before closing time. Kevin, Mark said while organizing papers, I'm going out to dinner with Carol tonight. It's important for us, so please don't call me unless it's a serious emergency. Okay. Understood, Mr. Mark, Kevin replied with a cordial smile. I hope you have a great evening. Mrs. Carroll seems like great company. She is, Mark said with a slight smile. See you tomorrow. After quickly reviewing the remaining work, Mark grabbed his jacket and drove home. Upon entering, he noticed Carol's usual absence in the living room. He placed his keys on the table and called, Carol? I'm in the bedroom, she replied from afar. I'm getting ready for dinner. Are you going to get ready too? We're almost there. I'll be right up, Mark replied as he began to climb the stairs. He took a quick shower and chose his best suit, adjusting the details carefully in the mirror. He knew Carol liked it when he dressed well, so he made sure to take extra care. Shortly after, he came downstairs and found Carol already waiting in the living room. She looked stunning. She wore an elegant black dress that perfectly suited her figure, complemented by delicate accessories. Her hair was immaculately styled, and her perfume was unmistakable. Mark stood still for a moment, admiring her. You look wonderful, he said sincerely. Thank you, Carol replied, adjusting her bag with a satisfied smile. And you look very handsome in that suit. Ready for our special night? Ready, Mark replied, checking his watch quickly. You made the reservation, right? Of course, Carol said, grabbing her bag and walking toward the door. Everything is set. We better go before we're late. Mark nodded and grabbed the car keys. They left together, getting into the vehicle. During the drive, Carol excitedly talked about the restaurant and how long she had wanted to go there. Mark, though not the most enthusiastic about going out, listened attentively and made occasional comments, trying to keep up with her excitement. Upon arriving at the restaurant downtown, Mark was impressed by the elegance of the place. It was exactly as Carol had described, sophisticated, with a panoramic view that highlighted the city lights. Mark parked the car and opened the door for Carol, who thanked him with a smile as she got out. They headed to the entrance of the restaurant, ready for the special night that they both, in their own way, had been looking forward to for some time. The restaurant was busy, but its atmosphere was peaceful, with soft lighting and modern decor exuding sophistication. As soon as Mark and Carol entered, a tall, elegant man in a perfectly tailored suit greeted them at the reception with a polite smile. "Good evening," the man said, slightly bowing his head. "Welcome to Maison Central. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Carol replied confidently, holding Mark's arm. "It's under my name, Carol." "One moment, please," the receptionist said, consulting a list on a golden tablet. After a few seconds, he looked up at them again with the same smile. "Ah, here it is. Table for two. Please follow me." They followed him down a corridor lit by soft lights that highlighted works of art on the walls. The man led them to a well-positioned table near a large window, offering a breathtaking view of the city. He made an elegant gesture indicating the seats. "Here is your table. I hope you have an excellent experience. If you need anything, I'll be at the reception," the man said, bowing slightly before returning to his post. Mark pulled out Carol's chair, and she smiled gratefully before sitting. He did the same and looked around, admiring the environment. "This place is very beautiful," Carol commented, adjusting her napkin on her lap. "Yes," Mark agreed, still examining the details around them. "Well organized. Not the kind of place I usually go to, but it seems nice." "See, it was worth coming," Carol said, a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. As they chatted, a young waiter approached their table. He had a polite smile and impeccable posture. "Good evening," the waiter said, stopping by the table. "My name is David, and I'll be happy to serve you tonight. Can I start by bringing you something to drink?" Carol quickly responded. "I'd like a red wine, please. Any recommendations?" "Of course, ma'am. We have an excellent house production that pairs well with any choice from the menu," David said, gesturing slightly to indicate his approval of the choice. "Great, I'll have that," Carol said with a smile. "Perfect. And for you, sir?" David asked, turning to Mark. "A glass of orange juice, please," Mark replied. "I'm driving, and I prefer not to drink." "Understood," David nodded. "I'll be back shortly with the drinks." A few minutes later, David returned with a tray. He carefully poured the wine into Carol's glass and placed the orange juice in front of Mark. "If you need anything else or are ready to order, just call," David said before leaving. Carol took a small sip of her wine, enjoying the taste, while Mark looked at the glass of juice in front of him. Carol noticed he wasn't drinking. "Won't you have the juice?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "I will," Mark replied. "I just need to use the bathroom first. I'll be back in a few minutes." Carol smiled slightly. "Sure, go ahead." As soon as Mark stood up and disappeared through the bathroom door, Carol discreetly looked around. The movement in the dining room was calm, and no one seemed to pay attention to her. With quick movements, she opened her bag, took out a small sachet, and poured its contents into Mark's juice. She carefully stirred the liquid with the handle of the knife on the table and wiped the knife on her napkin. Afterward, she put the empty sachet and used napkin inside her bag, maintaining a calm expression as if nothing had happened. What she didn't notice was that David was organizing a table just behind her and saw everything. He tensed visibly, but kept his composure, watching to see what would happen next. A few minutes later, Mark returned from the bathroom, drying his hands with a napkin he took from the holder near the sink. He walked back to the table, sat down, and adjusted his suit, letting out a relaxed sigh. His eyes fell on the glass of juice in front of him. With his hand already reaching for the glass, he was surprised when David suddenly appeared beside the table. "Sir, I apologize," David said urgently but controlled. "I need to speak with you before you drink that juice." Mark stopped, frowning. Talk to me? About what? It's important, David replied, casting a tense glance at Carol, who immediately realized something was wrong. I don't think it's safe for you to drink that. Carol, who had seemed relaxed up until now, straightened in her chair, her expression shifting to a slight indignation. What are you talking about? She said, her voice a bit sharper than usual. This is ridiculous. You're interrupting us for no reason. Mark was confused, switching his gaze between David and Carol. What's going on here? Why wouldn't it be safe to drink the juice? Why would you say something like that? David took a deep breath, clearly struggling with his nerves but determined to speak. Sir, I saw it. While you were in the bathroom, I was organizing the table just behind you. I saw her take something from her bag, a small sachet, and pour its contents into your juice. This is nonsense, Carol exclaimed, laughing nervously. You must be mistaken, or worse, you're making things up to embarrass us. I'm not mistaken, David replied, looking directly at Mark. I know what I saw, sir. After pouring the contents, she stirred the juice with the handle of the knife and wiped it with a napkin. Then she put the napkin and the empty sachet back in her bag. Mark blinked, stunned by the waiter's words. Carol, is this true? He's saying you put something in my juice. Of course it's not true, Carol said, her voice growing more defensive. He's lying, Mark. I don't know why he's saying this, but it's completely absurd. David, however, seemed determined to clarify the situation. Sir, please listen to me. My father works in agriculture, and I recognized the sachet. It was a toxic product, something used as a pesticide. It's highly dangerous if ingested. This information made Mark's eyes widen. He looked at Carol, now trying to control the wave of distrust starting to take over him. Why would he say something like this, Carol? Why would some waiter make up a story like this, especially with so many details? I don't know, Mark, Carol said, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Maybe he's trying to get attention or has some problem with me, but it's absurd that you're even considering believing him. If it's so absurd, then show the bag, Mark said, his voice now colder. Open the bag and prove he's wrong. Carol straightened in her chair, her hands gripping the armrest tightly. I can't believe you're asking me this. Are you really going to doubt me because of what some stranger is saying? Mark, this is offensive. This doesn't answer my question, Mark said, his voice firmer. If there's nothing to hide, why don't you show? Because I won't subject myself to this humiliation, Carol retorted, her voice now full of indignation. I didn't do anything wrong. He's the one making things up. Mark looked at David, who was clearly uncomfortable, but still standing firm in his position. Are you sure of what you saw? Yes, sir, David said, shaking his head. I'm not lying. I know what I saw, and I know what was in the sachet. I'm not here to cause trouble, but I couldn't stay quiet while something like this was happening. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. He turned back to Carol. If there's nothing, then drink the juice. Carol's face turned pale. What? She said, stammering. Drink the juice, Mark repeated, pushing the glass toward her. If David is lying, then you have nothing to fear. I don't have to prove anything, Carol said, now clearly nervous. This is humiliating, Mark. I can't believe you're doing this to me. Then give me the bag, Mark said, getting up from his chair, his patience clearly worn thin. Either you drink the juice or give me the bag. There's no third option here. Carol froze, her eyes fixed on the glass in front of her. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something, but she fell silent. David took a step back, watching as the tension escalated. Mark shook his head slowly, disappointed. He looked at David. Call the manager. I want to resolve this now. Yes, sir, David said, nodding before quickly moving away, leaving the tension hanging in the air. A few minutes passed, and David returned with a tall man with dark hair and a well-groomed beard, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He walked with a firm posture, but wore a concerned expression. When he arrived at the table, he introduced himself respectfully. "Good evening," the man said, slightly bowing his head. "My name is Donald. I'm the manager of this restaurant. David has reported an unusual situation here. Could you explain what's happening?" Mark stood up, keeping calm, although the tension in his expression was evident. He looked directly at the manager before speaking. "First of all, I apologize to you and your staff for any discomfort this may have caused, but unfortunately I need the police to be called immediately. This situation is serious." Donald frowned slightly, attentive. "Serious how, sir? Please, be clear." Mark took a deep breath, pointing to Carol, who was sitting, clutching her bag tightly. "My fiancée apparently tried to poison me. The waiter here, David, saw her pour something into my juice while I was in the bathroom. She won't drink the juice, nor will she hand me the bag to prove there's nothing wrong. I believe her actions speak for themselves. I want the police to come and deal with this." Carol suddenly stood up, her tone indignant. "This is crazy, Mark. How can you say such a thing? You trust what a waiter says more than me, the person you're going to marry." "Then prove it's a lie," Mark said, his tone colder. "Drink the juice or give me the bag. That's all I'm asking." "I don't need to subject myself to this humiliation," Carol shouted, her voice rising, but there was a palpable nervousness in her tone. "You should trust me, Mark." Donald, observing the exchange, kept his professional posture, but his voice grew more serious. "Mr. Mark, miss, this is a very serious accusation. If you truly believe this happened, I agree that the police should be called. We cannot ignore something of this magnitude." Mark nodded, pulled out his phone, and made the call. "I'm at the Maison Central restaurant downtown. My fiancée tried to poison me, and there are witnesses who can confirm this. Please send a team immediately." He listened to the response on the other end, thanked them, and hung up. He looked at Carol, whose face was now completely pale, her eyes wide with desperation. "The police will be here in a few minutes," Mark said, sitting back down. The next few minutes were filled with awkward silence. Carol avoided eye contact with Mark or David, while Donald stayed beside the table, attentive, and David remained in the background. Shortly after, 2 police officers entered the restaurant, guided by the receptionist. "Good evening," the taller officer said, holding a briefcase. "We received a report of attempted poisoning. Who made the call?" "I did," Mark said, standing up again. "My fiancée tried to poison me during dinner. There are witnesses who can confirm this." "Sir, please explain in detail what happened," the officer said, pulling out a notebook. Mark recounted everything, from the moment he went to the bathroom until being alerted by David. The waiter intervened, confirming the story. "I saw when she took a sachet from her bag and poured it into his juice. I recognized the product because my father works in agriculture. It's a very strong agricultural poison." The officers exchanged glances before turning to Carol. "Ma'am, may we check your bag?" "No," Carol said quickly, clutching her bag tightly. "This is invasive. You don't have the right." Mark intervened, looking at the officers. "Do you have something to test the drink? If there's something toxic in it, that will solve the issue." "Yes," said the officer, holding the briefcase. He opened it and pulled out a small white tube. "This is a preliminary test. It doesn't identify the exact substance, but it indicates the presence of harmful substances." The officer dipped the tube into the glass of juice. A few seconds later, the liquid in the tube turned red. He held up the tube, showing it to everyone. "There is something toxic in the drink. To identify the substance, it will need to be sent to the lab, but it's confirmed that it's harmful." Everyone looked at Carol, whose expression now showed pure desperation. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "hand over your bag now, or we'll take it by force." "I won't hand anything over," Carol said, her voice trembling. The officer didn't hesitate. He pulled the bag from her hands and began searching through it. Inside, he found the empty sachet and the dirty napkin exactly as David had described. The officer held up the sachet and showed it to everyone. "This is sufficient evidence," he said firmly, placing the sachet in a plastic evidence bag. Carol, seeing the item identified as evidence, lost control. Her defensive posture crumbled, and rage took over. As the officers prepared the handcuffs, Mark, his face filled with pain, finally asked, "Why, Carol? Why did you do this to me?" She looked at him, her face, once filled with desperation, now showing pure contempt. "Why? Do you really want to know why?" she said with a bitter laugh. "For money, Mark. You're so naive you didn't even realize it. It was never love. It was never about you. It was always about what you could give me." Her words cut through Mark like knives. He shook his head in disbelief. "I trusted you. I thought you were the only person I could count on. After everything we went through, I lost my parents, Carol. You were all I had." Carol laughed again, a cruel sound that made both the officers and even David exchange uncomfortable glances. "You think someone like me would be with someone like you for love? Please, Mark, look at you. A strange man, obsessed with work, a boring nerd, always locked up in your little world of numbers and graphs. You're pathetic. Pathetic," Mark said, his voice faltering as he tried to hold back tears. "Yes, pathetic," Carol continued, her eyes full of fury. "I deserve more. I deserve luxury, comfort, excitement, and you're nothing but a work machine. The only good thing about you is your money. I thought I could put up with you for a little longer, but I'm done. If you died here, the restaurant would be to blame, and I'd get everything. You were never anything more than a way to what I really wanted." Mark lowered his eyes, his shoulders heavy with sadness. He took a deep breath, trying to find strength. "I loved you, Carol," he said in a barely audible tone, "and all you did was use me." "Love?" Carol scoffed. "You don't even know what that is. Love doesn't pay bills, Mark. You're just another rich idiot who fell for someone clever. Now take me away from here, because I'm done listening to this loser." The officers finally put the handcuffs on her. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted murder," one of them said, escorting her out of the restaurant as she continued to mutter insults. Once Carol was taken away, Mark remained seated, motionless as he processed everything that had happened. David, standing beside him, seemed uncomfortable but remained silent until Mark finally broke the silence. "Thank you, David," Mark said with a tone filled with gratitude. "If it weren't for you, I probably wouldn't be here right now." "Sir, I just did what I thought was right," David replied humbly. "But I'm sorry this happened to you. It can't be easy." Mark slowly shook his head. "It's not. But it's better to know now than to keep living a lie. You were brave to intervene, even though you didn't know how I would react. That's rare, David." He then turned to the manager. "Sir, I truly apologize. It was never my intention to bring a problem like this to your restaurant. It's a beautiful place, and I regret any discomfort caused." The manager nodded, maintaining his professional posture. "Mr. Mark, don't worry. Situations like this are extreme and out of our control. I'm relieved that everything was resolved before something worse happened. I wish you strength to overcome this." After thanking him again, Mark asked for the check and made sure to leave a generous tip for David. He left the restaurant, feeling emotionally drained, but determined to move forward. In the following weeks, Carol faced a trial that drew attention from the local media due to the unusual nature of the case. The evidence was overwhelming: the sachet found in her bag, the dirty napkin with residue, David's testimony, and the poison test on the juice. During the trial, Carol showed little to no remorse. She kept a cold demeanor, refusing to look at Mark or admit guilt. When the verdict was given, the judge was clear. The defendant is found guilty of attempted first-degree murder with irrefutable evidence and premeditated behavior. The sentence is 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole until halfway through the sentence. Mark listened to the verdict in silence. When Carol was escorted out of the room, she threw one last look of hatred at him, but Mark felt nothing anymore. For him, that chapter was closed. In the months that followed, Mark focused on overcoming the pain and humiliation caused by Carol. He concentrated on his company, but often remembered David's courage that night at the restaurant. He decided that he needed to do something more for the young man who, besides saving his life, had shown integrity in such a critical moment. One night, Mark returned to Maison Central, the same restaurant where everything had happened. When he entered, the receptionist greeted him, surprised to see him again. "Good evening, sir," the man said politely. "It's a pleasure to see you here again. Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," Mark replied with a slight smile. "I'd like to speak with David if he's available." "Of course," the receptionist said before stepping away to call David. A few minutes later, David appeared, visibly surprised to see Mark there. "Mr. Mark, good evening. How are you?" "I'm good, David. Better now, actually," Mark said, extending his hand to greet him. "Could we talk? I'd like to discuss something important with you." "Of course," David said, a bit intrigued. "We can sit over there in the corner if you'd like." The two sat at a discreet table, away from the restaurant's hustle and bustle. Mark started. "David, I've been thinking a lot about that night, about what you did for me. You didn't just save my life, but you also opened my eyes to something I didn't want to see. Your courage was impressive." "I just did what any decent person would do," David replied humbly. "No, David," Mark shook his head. "Not everyone would have done what you did. You could have stayed quiet, thinking it wasn't your problem, but you decided to act, and that changed everything." David stayed silent, clearly touched by Mark's words, who continued, "I want to give back. I want to help you achieve something greater. I'm willing to fund your studies, whatever course you want to take. Also, I'd like to offer you an entry-level position at my company. I believe you can grow a lot if given the right opportunity." David's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Mark, I don't even know what to say. This is so generous." "It's not generosity, David," Mark said with a sincere smile. "It's gratitude. You deserve it." After a brief pause, David nodded, emotional. "I accept, Mr. Mark. This is an opportunity I never imagined having. Thank you, truly." "Great," Mark said, shaking David's hand. "Let's do this together. You'll see, the future can be very promising." In the following months, David started his studies with Mark's support and began working at the company, showing dedication and competence. Mark treated him not just as an employee, but as a great friend. Over time, Mark found a new peace. He realized that despite the betrayal he had suffered, there were still people like David who were honest, loyal, and willing to do good without expecting anything in return. This gave him a new perspective on life and renewed his hope for the future. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.